Hello, I'm Tim White. I work for Exlana sheep breeding company. One of the things we try to do is to produce healthy and viable livestock for our customers. And two of the diseases we focus on are Maida-Wiesner and border disease. In a minute, we've got Emily Gascoigne from Synergy Vets telling us about border disease and the problems it can cause and why it's important to screen your flock for it and only buy in tested animals. Before that, I'll just remind you that we've got our sale next week, and if you want to come to the sale in person, you need to register with me by emailing me at tim@exlana.co.uk, and if you want to bid online through Sell My Livestock, we have our first cyber sale, and you need to register with them well before the day to make sure your details are up and to enable you to bid. Thank you very much. Let's see what Emily says.
Hi, my name's Emily Gascoigne and I'm a specialist sheep vet working with Synergy Farm Health. I work with commercial sheep flocks across the southwest, and I'm going to be chatting to you about border disease. Border disease is caused by a virus. For those of you familiar with BVD in cattle, it's from the same family of viruses, and it infects flocks when it's brought in on carrier animals. So like BVD in cattle, when sheep are infected in utero, so the neonatal or the embryonic baby lamb, what we can sometimes end up with, if infected at a key stage, is these persistently infected animals that go on to shed virus every day throughout their lives. Sometimes these animals also give us a clue that they're persistently infected, and we can see them born as hairy shakers. So these are neonatal baby lambs with neurological signs, often shivering and trembling when stimulated in a pen, and often with really wiry coats. But it's not as simple as that. These animals, these persistently infected lambs, are not always that obvious, and sometimes we can introduce them inadvertently into flocks with purchased animals not showing these classic signs but still shedding virus. So if we introduce border disease with a carrier into a flock, let's say for argument's sake that's naive, has never met border disease before, and we've got lots of vulnerable animals, the clues that we might have introduced it include a disappointing scanning and specifically too many barren sheep, might be a disappointing lambing and specifically abortion or ill thrift, or lambs that are very vulnerable to picking up infection in the neonatal period. Or we may see increased ill thrift throughout the flock, throughout the production calendar. Worked with a flock with border disease where the first clue was actually not disappointing fertility, but lambs that were succumbing to pasteurellosis despite vaccination. So disappointing fertility, increased lamb loss, increased abortion, or ill thriftiness and evidence of immunosuppression. So a common question I get asked is, I'm not sure about border disease, have I got it in my sheep flock? And there are a few ways to sort of start looking on that. Best thing to do is have a chat to your vet to produce something that's tailored for your flock. But clues, at the very instance, and a good piece of advice anyway, is to investigate abortions. Anything above 2 to 3% of the tupped flock aborting, save some samples and have a chat to your vet about investigating those. If it's post-lambing, you've not got those samples but you still want to check, we can do young stock screens in the same way that we do in cattle and have a look to see if there's any antibody evidence. So have the sheep in my flock come across border disease virus? But in a scenario where we're purchasing sheep, or we've identified these hairy shakers, or we're suspicious about individuals, the best thing to do in that instance is start looking for the virus itself. Commonly, we do something called an antigen or a PCR test, looking for evidence of that virus being shed, and that's available on blood, but also on ear notching samples as well. So the best thing to do is have a chat to your vet and have a plan in place, particularly with reference to biosecurity at the point of purchase. So there have been a couple of national projects looking at how common border disease is in the national sheep flock, and there are some estimates which place it as high as 54% in one study, so that's more than 1 in 2 flocks have some evidence based on this particular piece of work. There will be risk factors for certain flocks, previously buying it in boundary contact with other flocks that potentially increase the risk of having border disease, but there's evidence that it is common. In the practice that I work at, usually we have at least one flock every year that has a border disease outbreak in the flock, and as I say, evidence of that being disappointing scanning or issues at lambing. So certainly something that we are seeing in clinical practice. So a really common question I get asked is BVD and border disease, lots of similar letters, how common and what are the similarities between them? Well, they're both from the same family of viruses, and as I've said, they behave in a very, very similar way. The formation of these persistently infected animals that we may inadvertently bring into a flock or a herd as Trojan horses. But the similarities don't stop there. So we do know that border disease virus can infect cattle, and cattle BVD virus can move into sheep. This is really relevant for us because for many of you with cattle herds, BVD will be something you'll be prioritising and actioning, and going forward it may be something we do need to consider. I think it's really important to put it in context. BVD for cattle is very important for cattle, and over 60% of border disease cases in sheep are true border disease. So it's really important we do focus and prioritise each of those respective viruses in the species that they originate, but we do need to be aware that there are instances where they can move between the two. A really important difference between BVD and border disease in sheep is that there are lots of very effective vaccines available for use in cattle, and that's a really important part of the preventative and control strategy for that disease. However, in sheep, there are no vaccines available for border disease / BVD, no licensed alternatives for sheep. Crucially, and a question I often get asked, is there any cure for border disease or a persistently infected animal? Can I do anything about it once it's been created? And the answer is no. Those persistently infected animals will always shed that virus. Often animals with secondary infections, if they as a consequence of immunosuppression, proactive vaccination management will certainly help that, but we do need to remember that one of the big consequences of border disease is essentially running everybody down in the flock, making everybody susceptible to other diseases, but no cure for persistently infected animals. A really nice question that I often get asked is, well, I don't think I've got any evidence of border disease in my flock. We've done some young stock screening, we monitor our abortion, we've not seen any hairy shakers, we really don't think we have any evidence. I don't want it, how do I make sure I don't bring it in? Well, there's two really important prongs to that approach, and it largely focuses on what's happening at the boundary of your farm, and more specifically, what's crossing it. So point of purchase of animals is a really important control point. You can reduce the risk by either choosing to source and purchase animals who have already been tested prior to the point of sale. You're looking for an animal that's had antigen or PCR testing and has come back negative. If that's not available or you can't logistically fit that in pre-purchase, the next best option is to get the animal or animals into isolation, which is best practice anyway, recommended for 3 weeks post any purchase. Get the animals tested in that window, and you're looking for a negative result before they join the main flock. But remember, that's not the be-all and end-all, and your flock may inadvertently be coming in contact with other flocks, and boundary management and risk at that point is really, really important. Double fencing, and ideally 2 to 3 metres apart, is going to be gold standard. If you're not achieving that, or common grazing, you do need to be aware that there is a risk factor there for introduction of this disease into your flock.
So that was Emily Gascoigne from Synergy Vets explaining about border disease and the importance of keeping control of it. Exlana put a lot of effort into keeping our rams healthy. So all the rams you buy from us are tested negative for Maida Vizsla and border disease. Just to remind you again, if you want to register for the sale next week, do it now, and we look forward to seeing you all next week.